Hey, you've made it back to the modern world in the 1920s. The pace is fast, but take your time and look around.
Airship. In the 1920s, the most fashionable way to travel long distances was by airship. The biggest airships were 245 metres, 800 feet, long. They carried their wealthy passengers in luxury. However, airships were not very safe, and there were several terrible accidents.
Travelling by airship was uncomfortable, luxurious.
Skyscraper. Very tall buildings called skyscrapers began to be built in cities in the 1920s. Steel frames kept the skyscrapers standing, and lifts allowed passengers to travel up and down their many floors. In those days, the tallest skyscraper was 102 stories high.
Skyscrapers began to be built in the 1920s, in the 1960s.
Aeroplane. Flying in the 1920s was very different than it is today. Early aeroplanes had propellers instead of jet engines and had to fly at low altitudes. They were not very fast or comfortable and could only carry up to 6 passengers.
Early aeroplanes could carry 6 passengers, 100 passengers.
Modern clothes. Clothes in the 1920s were a sign of changing lifestyles. Women's dresses were more comfortable than before, and skirt lengths were shorter. Men wore suits that were more casual than those of the past.
In the 1920s, clothes were more formal than before, more casual than before.
Bathroom. By the early 1900s, many people living in cities had running water in their homes. They had flushing toilets and could run baths with hot water straight from the tap. In the past, people had to get water from wells or from pumps on the street. Radio. In the 1920s, radio stations broadcast programs into people's homes for the first time. In the days before television, radio was very popular. Families and friends gathered round to listen to music, news, sport and plays.
In the 1920s, people enjoyed listening to the radio, watching television. Modern inventions. Some of the things that are important to us today were only invented in the last 80 years. Drag into the box the invention you would miss most if you lived in the 1920s. Computer, television, videos, CDs, toy robot, skateboard, personal stereo, computer.
Electricity at home. Electricity in the home improved the lives of many people. It made it easy to light and heat the home. It also led to the invention of many labour-saving devices, such as electric irons, vacuum cleaners and hairdryers.
In the 1920s, electricity was used to run cars, to light people's homes.
Telephone. By the 1920s, many people had telephones, which had been invented in 1876. The first telephone calls had to be made through an operator. In the 1920s, dial telephones allowed people to call one another directly.
Telephones were first invented in 1920, 1876.
Picture Palace. In the 1920s, going to the cinema was a favourite pastime. People loved watching films in the grand cinemas called picture palaces. At that time, all the movies were black and white and silent. The first film with sound was made in 1927.
In the 1920s, films were made in colour, in black and white.
Working women. In the past, there had been few jobs outside the home for women. During the 1900s, more women began to work in offices, shops and schools. By the 1920s, women in many countries had won the right to vote.
By the 1920s, many women had won the right to vote to join the army.
Shopping. There were no supermarkets in the 1920s. People bought their food from local butchers, bakers and greengrocers. Some foods were imported from far away, bringing a greater choice of things to eat. Cars. The first cars were invented in the 1880s. Early cars were very expensive and not very fast. Henry Ford's Model T was the first car that was cheap enough for many people to afford. In 1925, a Model T cost $290. Millions were sold worldwide.
The most popular car of the 1920s was the Ford Model T, the Rolls-Royce. Congratulations! You have completed your journal.
Newspapers. Newspapers in the 1920s contained up-to-date stories from around the world. In the past, many stories came out long after the events had happened. In the 1920s, newspapers were widely available, so everyone could read the latest news.
Cars.
How about that for talent? You found the professor!
This certificate is to thank you for rescuing me. Yes, you are now a history explorer. I must say my goodbyes now and carry on with my travels through history. You know, there's so much to discover. Make yourself at home in my attic, and thanks again.
Well, my worthy adversary, you're smarter than I thought. I don't suppose you'd like to try your luck again?
Would you like to play again?